The following production is part of the Play Some Video Games podcast network. Greetings, town folk, and welcome to Board with Video Games, the gaming podcast that strives for the right balance of coverage, the games you play on your table and on your television. You can think of us as the Ponch and John of gaming podcasts. We're a proud member of the PSVG Podcast Network and a member of the Make Us Better team over on Patreon. I am one of your hosts, Kyle, and joining me on this co-op adventure, the trustworthy deputy to my grizzled sheriff, Josh. How are you doing this evening?
I am doing well, surprisingly.
Why surprisingly?
It's just been a long day, and I just got over a cold, and now I'm in the middle of a new cold. So the days and nights have been miserable, and I'm not feeling too bad right now.
It sounds like you're feeling absolutely great. It sounds like you're feeling amazing. So, a little bit of inside baseball for the listener. We are recording this episode on October 31st, Halloween. It's Halloween right now. And you are getting a very special episode tomorrow, November 1st, with Colin Flores from Plaid Hat Games. But this episode won't be posting until Thursday, November 8th, because I am traveling. I will be out next week. I'll actually be in Texas. So we weren't going to be able to record an episode next week. So we are recording an extra episode this week because we did not want you all to miss out. We haven't missed a week other than the E3 week since we started, and we wanted to keep that streak going. So as a result, if something super massive, because this is the news episode, if something super massive from a news perspective happens or something really interesting happens in the next week, that's why we're not talking about it, because we are recording this, like I said, on October 31st, Halloween. Speaking of which, Josh, did you have a good Halloween?
I worked, so it was just another night.
So we've had this conversation in the Discord a little bit, which you all should join the Discord if you can, because we have really fun conversations there. My town, the town I live in, has set hours for trick-or-treating.
Yes.
And the set hours for trick-or-treating this year were on Monday, the 29th, from 5:30 to 8 p.m. So today was Halloween, but we had 0 trick-or-treaters today, but we had a whole bunch of them on Monday.
Wow.
So are you a fan? You have set hours where you are, correct?
Yeah, it's 5:30 to 8:30 here.
Okay. Now, I'm pretty interested because I asked the question in the Discord. It seems pretty 50-50 about people who have set hours versus people who is a free-for-all. So I grew up in an area that is a free-for-all. I now live in an area that has set hours. And, you know, even as a person who hands out candy, like I don't have kids, so I don't take anyone trick-or-treating. As a person who hands out candy, I appreciate the set hours to a degree because I know when people are going to show up. I have the candy ready. I know that I can get my dogs, one of them who's a little bit special. I shouldn't say special, a little bit very protective of our home. I can give them some downers to make them chill out a little bit. Like, I enjoy that, knowing that ahead of time. But man, as a kid, I just loved, like, I feel like that it's got to take some of the fun away if you're a kid of knowing that this is when I go trick-or-treating. It seems more like a scheduled thing you got to go to than a fun event that you get to, like, run around and just, you know, experience Halloween for the way it's meant to be. So
yeah, we didn't always have set hours either, but it's a safety thing here. Like, whether it's kids getting hit by vehicles or, you know, parents letting the older kids go out and pretty much jump the littler kids for their candy and stuff. It's more of a safety issue now than it was back when I was a kid.
Does that actually happen?
Here it does, absolutely, yeah.
Really? Man.
Egging of houses and cars and slashing of tires and stuff like that.
Wow. You definitely have a lot of shenanigans going over there on the East Coast.
Well, it's all city here, so it's a little different. Like my brother It's a few towns away, and they're all like cul-de-sacs and single family houses. It's a lot more like it's a lot easier for them to do stuff.
Mhm.
Where we're in the city where it's all three deckers and busy city streets. So they probably don't have a curfew out where they are, but
Gotcha. Makes sense. But hey, you know what? This podcast is like a week after you're hearing this a week after Halloween. Most people will probably be onto the other holidays already, which, November, December, we're hitting that stretch where most of at this point the big games have come out. There's still a few on the horizon, but now it's much more about setting up family time and setting up holidays and all of those wonderful things. But hey, you know what? This is not a podcast about holidays. This is a podcast about games. So thank you so much for joining us this week. As always, if you have any feedback, questions, suggested topics, hit us up at Board with VG on Twitter, or check out all the awesome things Josh posts over on the Instagram, also at Board with VG. We have a Facebook page at facebook.com/boardwithvg, and we'd love for you to give us a 5-star rating over there. Or if you want to, we'd love for you to give us a 5-star rating on our new podcast feed, which is now available on iTunes and every place else just about that you could possibly listen to podcasts. Board with Video Games now has its own feed. It will still populate in the PSVG feed as well. So if you listen to most or all of the PSVG shows, you can stay subscribed there. But if you want to be more a la carte about your choices, feel free to just subscribe to our individual feed and you'll get the new show each week when it comes out. And we'd love for you to leave us a rating. We also have long-form communication, so you can hit us up with an email, boardwithvg@gmail.com. And as always, use that hashtag boardwithvg so that we know what you're playing, what you're doing on all of those different social medias. And finally, if you're interested in helping make us better, check out patreon.com/makeusbetter. And a big thanks to all the supporters there. Those of you who have donated money, that is how we were able to get that feed to ourselves. So thank you so much for that. And if you want to chip us $1 or $2, we definitely appreciate it. But more important than anything, we're just happy that you're here listening, chatting, interacting with us. That is why we do this show. So that is enough of the housekeeping and enough about talking about holidays. Josh, what is some of the hot news in the board game world?
Well, it's been a slow... it's funny because Essen just ended, and usually it's a big news cycle, but we didn't really get too much out of Essen. That was just surprising news. Pretty much everything was reported early.
Yeah.
But on our last episode, yesterday, for us, we talked with Colin Flores, designer of Guardians from Black Hat Games, in which we briefly touched on the news of a Mice and Mystics movie entering development from DreamWorks. And while Colin couldn't say much, because that's his job, that isn't going to stop us. So we're just going to kind of talk about what's going on with the movie. It is early, so there's rumored, I'm assuming if it's on IMDb, it should be semi-factual news. So they have attached Alexandre Aja, or Aja, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, to direct and co-write the script with Aquaman scribe David Leslie Johnson from Vertigo Entertainment's Roy Lee and John Berg are producing. Vertigo is a sub set of DC Comics. They were acquired in the 90s, I want to say. But essentially what we're looking at is something we alluded to in the last episode. We have the director of this movie, we'll say, has directed previous movies, Horns, if you've seen that with Daniel Radcliffe. It's actually a pretty entertaining film. Piranha 3D, which Kyle is a fan of. The Hills Have Eyes, which is one of my favorite horror movies. Not the original, but the 2000s version. In High Tension, a movie I actually love and Lucas hated, which funny enough was just going through conversations on our Discord about that movie. So those are all movies he's directed. He also wrote the movie Maniac, the movie Mirrors, which I couldn't drag myself to watch because there's some graphic stuff just in the trailer. And he co-wrote Hills Have Eyes. We also have Jerry Hawthorne as a writer who wrote Mice and Mystics, but has no movie credits to his name. And David Leslie Johnson, who was on the Aquaman film. He did some episodes of The Walking Dead. He wrote The Conjuring 2, Wrath of the Titans, and Orphan, which was supposedly a good movie. I did not see it. But because it's so early, we don't really know much about the movie itself. So some of the questions I have are, will this be like a live action, kind of like what Disney's been doing with its animal movies, where it's, CGI, but done in the vein of live action? Is it going to be animated because it's DreamWorks? And are we talking like Shrek animated, or are we talking like old school, made to look like pen and paper, or even stop motion? Like, what kind of art style are we going to get? So there's a lot of exciting things, but I would ask you, Kyle. I haven't played the game yet, and it's quickly now risen to the top of my must-play list. Where do you think they'll go, and can you touch on any of the story elements from the game at least?
Well, I think this is a really interesting thing because part of me wonders, are they going to follow the elements of the story that is in the game? Because this is a very story-heavy game. When the game starts out, and I don't necessarily want to talk in depth about specific story points, especially if that's what they're going to go for. But basically, what happens is that you have a group of folks who have been put under a spell and have been changed to mice, and then they are navigating the castle, trying to, I think, save the king, I think is what their job is. But since they're mice, they're fighting spiders and roaches and like things like that as they try to get themselves back to the sorcerers who changed them into mice to get themselves changed back to humans. So that's very broad, very, very broad look at the story. But like I said, the game is very story focused. Every time you are playing a game, you set up a board, you read a very lengthy introduction story chapter about what is going on. You play the game, do the dungeon crawl portion because it's a dungeon crawl. And then if you're successful, you move on to the next chapter, set everything up like it says, read the very, very lengthy intro as to what's going on and what you see and how things are progressing. So it's very, I think it's an interesting pickup. I think they have said specifically that it's DreamWorks Animation who's going to be doing this. So Obviously we're looking at an animation studio. And really, obviously Disney Animation gets a lot of the big looks of and Pixar when it comes to animated movies. And while I agree that overall they have a track record that might be a little bit more impressive than DreamWorks has done some things that are actually really, really good, and I think in some ways really underrated. They did Kung Fu Panda. I absolutely adore Kung Fu Panda. I adore How to Train Your Dragon. I really like Troll Hunters on Netflix.
Monsters and Aliens.
Yeah, they have done some
good.
Yep, they have definitely done some really good things. Obviously we talked about Shrek, Rise of the Guardians, which is an excellent movie. So they've definitely done some good things. So I'm really excited by this pickup for them. I think it seems like a really good fit. I'm just really interested to see, movies get optioned all the time. Properties get purchased, or the rights to properties get purchased all the time to make movies. Unlike the video game industry, you hear how long have we been hearing about an Uncharted movie?
Yeah.
We hear about this. We hear about this stuff all the time. I really hope that this comes to fruition, though, because I feel like this is a really rich universe that can easily be made into a really compelling movie that's going to be good for kids and good for adults. So potentially. In general, what are your thoughts about DreamWorks Animation? Does this seem like a good fit? Are you excited about the prospects of a Mice and Mystics movie? And could there be a good board game movie before there's ever a good video game movie?
Yeah, that's definitely more plausible than anything else. Is that I think a board game movie is more easy to adapt because you're not putting voice and action to a board game as you are at the video game. So people aren't immediately attached to a character and don't want them portrayed any other way. Like you could make a pandemic movie. There are pandemic movies. It's called Contagion. It's called, all these other movies.
Right.
Just can retheme them. So I think I'm excited. The news is very exciting because it brings more eyes to the board game industry.
Absolutely.
And it could make Mice and Mystics, which I would argue is a severely underrated game for overall board gamers. I know that it has its audience. It's very highly rated as far as quality of game, but I think if you ask a lot of board gamers, they haven't played it.
Right.
And this could bring that to the forefront. And then we have Stuffed Fables movie.
Right.
And it opens the door for hopefully we don't get the Catan movie first and it ruins Hollywood on the idea of board game movies.
Right.
Like Battleship, the movie, right?
Oh yeah. I forgot about that movie.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily fits in the board game universe, even though it is based off of a board game.
Right.
I mean, people are like, oh yeah, it's that game I played when I was a kid, but they're not. I don't think, maybe it's just me. I don't think, when I think of Battleship, I don't think of contemporary board games. So, maybe people think, I heard it wasn't a terrible movie. I did not see it. Because I thought it looked terrible, and I probably won't see it. But this could be a step in the right direction for in board games. And you know what? If they just adapt them into kids stuff and they just focus on the lighter games, I'm still okay with that. I don't necessarily need to see a Century Spice Road movie or a Dice City movie. Like, obviously, properties need to lend themselves to that area, but yeah, I mean, I can't wait, and yeah, I hope it moves forward. I mean, already having a director and writers attached means that it was more than just an announcement of an IP edition.
Right.
It means they've already been talking about it,
right,
at some level. So, like, if we look at like Uncharted, there's never been a director attached. There's been directors talked about, and there's never been a star attached. There's been like Tom Holland recently was just kind of attached, but they've been talking about Uncharted movie for 6 years before Uncharted 3.
Yeah, they definitely have. I think I feel like there's been directors attached to the Uncharted movie before.
Maybe eventually, but I don't know that a director's ever signed anything to do a film. Like, I could be wrong, but I don't remember ever hearing a director being signed on to direct Uncharted. I always feel like it was like a rumored.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Sean Levy has been is actually attached.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
It's very possible. I mean, you're absolutely right with the way the Hollywood industry works. I mean, that's super possible. But I think, like, we aren't in a world where, like, people were whispering about a Mice and Mystics movie.
Right.
Like, 3 years before it was announced. So maybe that's the difference.
Right.
In comparing it to Uncharted.
Well, and I think the big thing too is that with movies, from what I understand, obviously I'm not a movie expert, but like having a director attached just means that, like, yes, we're going to go into pre-production and pitch something to the studio to see if they'll fund the full production, because they might pitch something, then the studio's like, nah, you're good. Yeah. So, even if they're attached, that obviously doesn't guarantee that they are going to be transitioned into full production, actually be able to shoot everything. So I think that it's not necessarily, I think there's, for Uncharted, I feel like pretty confident that directors have been attached. I just feel like that maybe they haven't gotten much past the here's my idea stage. Past that.
But if you look at Sean Levy, he has 63 upcoming projects.
Right, exactly.
What is that all about?
Right, which I was going to say then, because that's actually a wonderful transition. When talking about this Mice and Mystics movie, when we talked about it, briefly, I said I was a little bit worried based off of the director and writers that were chosen, that I had some concerns over that. Colin did a great job last week of talking about, a lot of writers started horror because it's low budget, it's low risk. So you can find out, whether someone has the chops. And, to be totally honest, David Leslie Johnson really has written, some movies that are highly rated. The Conjuring 2 is a really highly rated movie. The things that I see there, those I look at, Wrath of the Titans. That's the one that sticks for me a little
I
bit.
still enjoy that movie.
Right. The movie might be fun, but I don't think the script necessarily is a strong part of that movie. But I also, I look at, you talk about Sean Levy having a ton of projects that, David Leslie Johnson right now has The Conjuring 3, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Dungeons and Dragons, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and now Mice and Mystics that are all announced that they're attached as a writer for.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's how much time is going to be, how much time do they have in their day, in order to write this, in addition to things that we maybe don't know about that they're pitching or that they're trying to get worked on or that they're trying to do elsewhere. So that worries me a little bit with, already having, 5-ish movies in the hopper. Where is the priority, or how into Mice and Mystics is it? And, having Alexandre Aja, I think Aja, however you say his name,
who knows?
as the director. You're right. Piranha 3D, I think, is a great piece of genre filmmaking. Like, I think that movie, for the type of movie it is, fits perfectly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like directing animation is different. I could be wrong.
I'm sure it is.
I feel like there's some difference there. So I think maybe not having the animation background is a little worrisome. He's also attached to a couple upcoming movies that both sound like horror movies. One's called Crawl and one's called Space Adventure Cobra, which that seems like a really great name for a movie, right? Space Adventure Cobra.
Certainly does.
But it might be great. I like movies like that all the time. But yeah, so I'm just really interested, of these choices. I hope it turns out great. I hope that this is an excellent foray and step in the right direction to make these movies work well. And like I said, I have confidence in DreamWorks Animation, the studio that's looking at doing it. And that, to me, more than anything, gives me confidence that they've done some really good things in the past with the projects that they've worked on. And I really think this world is ripe to bring to the big screen or the small screen. Maybe they choose to do something smaller, and you see it on Netflix or something like that. I think it potentially could work really well in that capacity as well. One thing I was going to ask about, though, that I would love to get your feedback on. Do you think, is this the right game for this? When you think of board games that you'd want turned into movies, and I know you haven't played Mice and Mystics, and Colin even said last week that Mice and Mystics is a really great game. Stuffed Fables took Mice and Mystics and streamlined a lot of the nuance that was in that game, because there are a lot of like one-off rules or rules that are very not clunky, but you have to really like refer back to or look up because you don't run into them very often. Is this the game? Is this the game that if we're like, okay, we want to take a game, we're going to turn it into a movie, and maybe this movie will drive people to gaming that maybe haven't otherwise played games? Is there an IP that you would think you would prefer to have do this rather than Mice and Mystics?
I don't know, because I don't think that should be the main reason to do a franchise, is to draw people in from an audience. I'm totally happy with them making this, and I haven't even played the game, just knowing the premise, like knowing the idea of the game. I think it's a perfect game to grab hold of because it is a storytelling game. And they have that to work off of, which is good. They have something, they have a binding agent, if you will, for their story, as opposed to, like, if I look at a game like Mystic Vale or Ticket to Ride, like, those are tougher things to make into a film potentially, or you get the film with just the shared title and nothing to do with the game at all. And then that leads to people like being misled into buying a board game because it's named the same thing as a movie. It's also one of the things I hate about books that I enjoy, not being able to go back into a bookstore and find the original book, and now only being able to find a picture of the movie on the cover of my favorite book.
Yeah.
Like, that really bugs me too. So I don't think that they should be like rebranding anything either in this aspect. So is there a better game out there? Potentially. Like, it's very possible that someone has a favorite board game that would be more suitable for a film. But DreamWorks Animation, perfect. You can do anything with animation. You're not limited to human actors,
Right.
So it's a great first step into, I think, into what could potentially be a bunch of more board game movies.
Right. Absolutely.
And just a fun fact, I did look up some Uncharted stuff.
Okay.
8 years ago,
I knew it was a long time ago.
David O. Russell confirmed he was directing the Uncharted movie.
Okay.
And then a year later, 7 years ago, Mark Wahlberg confirmed he will play Nathan Drake. So that goes against everything I was saying about this could totally change. This could go into development hell. Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci were sought for roles in Mark Wahlberg's Uncharted movie. I'm assuming with De Niro playing Sully. So who knows the development cycles that this all went through and when writers and directors joined in and dropped off, but we're going all the way back 8 years to when this was announced. Drake's Deception. So it's interesting. So I think we need to take our mice and mystics with a grain of salt. We're all excited, and and Board of Video Games has been getting a little bit more chummy with Plaid Hat Games, so it's even exciting for us because we get to talk to Colin about things that are close to him.
Right.
So let's just hope it picks up some steam and keeps going.
Now all I'm thinking about is the David O. Russell Uncharted movie.
Would have been terrible.
What's that?
Would have been terrible.
You don't like David O. Russell as a director?
I like him as a director. He's not an action movie director.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, because Three Kings was good.
Three Kings was great. You're right. Okay, so he has that's a drama. Yeah.
Yeah, and he did The Fighter, which has pretty, when we're looking at some hand-to-hand combat,
Yeah.
So
it might have been a good character piece, but it probably would have upset every Uncharted fan because there wasn't enough shooting and puzzle solving.
Yeah, I mean, Silver Linings Playbook. I'm trying to Nate and Elena and their relationship, trying to bend that, which is often broken. I think there's some things that that David O. Russell could have done.
That's fair. Well, I mean, we'll never know.
We'll never know at this point. Awesome. Well, hey, that is some board game news. And, one thing to be aware of, dear listener, as we go through this episode might be a touch shorter. We'll see what happens because we only have a little bit of news to cover and then a very interesting topic of the show. But I don't know if that's going to take us 5 minutes or 50 minutes. So we'll see what happens. But in video game news, Red Dead Redemption 2 has a bigger opening weekend than Avengers Infinity War. What does this mean for the gaming industry, and what does this say about the future of gaming now that there are many mixed reviews about the game once people actually started playing it? Did overly positive reviews dictate sales, or is it just Rockstar's name and legacy? So, Josh, what say you? Red Dead Redemption 2 comes out, makes a whole boatload of money, and what was it, $725 million in 3 days. Was this smoke and mirrors, or is this because people were just stoked to play some more Red Dead?
So I knew GTA 5 sold a lot and is still selling a lot. I'm shocked by this number. It is unfathomable when you compare it to a movie like nothing beats Avengers. It beat one of the biggest movies of our lifetimes, box office wise, in a weekend, 3 days. I still can't wrap my head around it, and it's still crazy to me that Black Ops 4 made only, it says, 500 million in its first 3 days. Video games are. I get why it's part of a lot of controversy now because it's in the zeitgeist. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone knows about them. But that being said, $725 million means, based on the internet, there are a lot of unhappy consumers. a lot of people are not loving on this game. And it is surprising to me because GTA 5 is not my game, but I I have a hard time finding people who have anything bad to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more leaning to, yeah, all these GTA 5 people bought this game thinking they're playing Grand Theft Auto in the Wild Wild West, thinking they're playing as Bruce Willis in like Last Man Standing. And this is more like Clint Eastwood, and the good, bad, and the ugly, the slow crawl, the slow walk, the like they're not going in guns blazing necessarily. So I think a lot of people are jumping into this game that did not play the first game. Would obviously because of the sales numbers, there's definitely more people playing this than played the first one. And for me, I think it's getting the Rockstar treatment, just like any Marvel movie would get.
Mm-hmm.
If you put Marvel in the title, people go see it. And sometimes that leads to disappointment. Marvel's been pretty steady with the hits and the content in cinemas, but if you look at like the Netflix series and what's been going on with that, you can see that the Marvel name's waning a little bit. So maybe that's what's going to happen with Rockstar. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Because when we looked at reviews that came out a couple of days before this game, and we talk about on our podcast a bunch the value of review scores
Yep.
and how effective they are. What do you think about this? Because every early sign was pointing to Breath of the Wild scores, Game of the Year scores. What do you think that means about everything that's going on with this?
Well, before I dump fully into that, because I don't want to lose sight of this dollar figure for a moment here. Sure. So here's my question to you. How much is it to go see a movie at your local theater?
That's a good point. It's like $15.
Okay. $15. Man, I mean, I spent $90 on our copy of Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Because I got the whatever edition, because I was like, well, why not? You know, no big deal. Like rewarding people when they do things that are cool. And I'm a firm believer, as I said multiple times, that games probably should cost more than they do. So I tend to, if I have a one step up option and I can afford it, I tend to try to do that. I think that this number is really cool, but I also think that they're comparing apples and oranges. Like,
to a point, yeah.
You know, like it's like, oh, $725 million in 3 days. That is a lot of money. And I'm not trying to take away at all from the amount of money that is. But trying to equate that to it being in some ways like more popular or more mainstream than, you know, Black Panther or, you know, Avengers Infinity War or Incredibles 2 or anything like that. I feel like that isn't really an accurate way to kind of use this number, and I feel like that's how this number is being used. Yeah, that is this huge entertainment opening, and it's a ton of money. They should be super proud. I hope everyone gets huge bonuses. Like, that's awesome. But I think it's trying to be conflated into showing how mainstream games are, when you could have paid for your entire family to go see a movie for the price of one copy of this game.
That's true. Yeah, and I mean, I can see the other side. Like, it is hard to compare the two because the audiences are much wider for films too.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of which way you're debating the numbers, like obviously you have less people buying a game that's made a lot more than more people are seeing of a movie.
Right.
So it could potentially meet in there, but I saw Avengers 3 times in theaters, and that's still less than one copy of Red Dead.
Right.
And that's a base of one base copy. So yeah, you're right. I think it's just the shock value, because it's something people can relate to, hearing how much money Avengers made. So they're like, oh yeah, okay, I relate to that being a big number.
Right. Well, and I think the interesting thing too is they're saying 725 million worth of copies. That was a global release.
That's true.
And usually when they talk about box office numbers, they talk about domestic box office.
Yeah.
And again, still way more. Like even if it was global box office for the first weekend, it's still more. I'm not trying to say that it's different, but I feel like they try to do all of these things to make games see. And I don't think games aren't mainstream, but I get really. I feel like the video game industry so much is like, we matter, we're equal, we count too, look at us, and they do whatever they can to try to make that be true.
Yeah.
That we see statistics like this and are like, oh, clearly video games more popular than movies, right? Like, is that what they're trying to say? Like, I just think it's an interesting thing that the video game industry often does.
That's true. You think they had enough copies to send them to all the mom and pop stores?
No, they couldn't manufacture enough discs.
I could walk into 3 GameStops near my house and they have plenty of copies.
Right, for sure. But to get back to your question, though,
yes.
I do think it is an interesting, as I've said, reviews rarely dissuade me from buying a game I was going to buy anyway. I was eventually going to buy Red Dead. Did the reviews make me buy it day one? No, they did not. What caused me to buy it day one? An Australian Shepherd. Because I saw an Australian Shepherd in someone's playthrough, and I was like, I want to find that dog, and I want to pet that dog, so I'm going to buy this game, which I get is stupid. I totally understand that. But I feel like maybe it encouraged some people who were going to wait to buy the game to buy it maybe sooner than they were going to if they saw the review scores. But I don't know how many people who weren't going to buy the game were suddenly convinced. And if you look at the amount of advertising that was done for this game, there was a lot. Like, there was a ton of advertising for this game. People knew it was a Rockstar game. And maybe people didn't play the first one and they were like, hey, I like GTA. I've been playing a lot of GTA. It'd be cool to get a different feel, of GTA in a different area. And this game obviously does not feel like GTA.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think there was a bit of sway because of the review scores, but not in the sense of suddenly all these people were buying the game that weren't going to. I think maybe people bit a little sooner than they were planning. Like, maybe people were hoping for a good Black Friday deal, but they're like, oh, this game got a really high rating, I'm going to buy it now instead of waiting a month. Or they were going to buy it, over the holidays when they had some time to sit down and play. So my guess would be, with no scientific evidence to back it up, that is more likely what happened than people picking it up who weren't going to. I also think it's interesting because it does seem, and I talked about this a little bit last week, it seems like this game is not per se a mainstream game. Like, this is a really immersive, almost more of an immersive sim than it is a action-packed video game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's okay. I think there's definitely room for that. I don't think that's a bad thing. But if people played a ton of GTA, this might not be what they were expecting. And you're right. That might be why some people are not as thrilled with Red Dead as maybe the critics were, who play video games for a living. Just like a lot of movie critics like movies that a lot of the mainstream audience don't like because they watch movies for a living. What do you think, sir?
No, I mean, I agree with you. It's something that I knew was going to happen. I didn't expect it to be as big number wise, but I think you kind of put it into perspective that while it's a big number, it's not necessarily as big as it's being blown up to be. I mean, it's definitely an incredible amount of money. But the bigger question now is, what does it do in a week? That's what's going to be more telling than the 3 days.
Right.
And that's, if they want to compare it to movies, that's kind of how movies work too. You can have a big opening, but the biggest news about a movie is how much it dropped.
Yep. What was the drop week too? Yep.
That's always the news. So you get the good headline for one day, how much money you made on opening weekend. And then it's all about how badly you do, because that's the culture we're obsessed with. How quickly will this be out of theaters?
Right. And I think, and another interesting thing to think of, and obviously with movies, a big movie budget is $200 million. Red Dead has been in development for 8 years, 7 years, 8 years. What was the development budget for this game? Like
And it's a whole
I
new engine too, so it's got to be expensive.
right, like, and I have no doubts that they made money at this point, but if the game, AAA games sometimes push that 200 million mark, and then you have double that probably for advertising, like, you have to make this big number in order to make these profitable and for you to be able to put enough money in your quote unquote war chest so that you can, in 4 or 5 or 8 years, release the next installment of this game, unless we get Bully 2, like the rumor is coming in a couple of years. So.
Well, it's crazy. I never really put it into perspective until today, actually. I was listening to a story about the developers of the game Dreadnought, which just like kind of sort of let a bunch of its staff go. They gave them like an incentive plan. But they were paying their staff $80,000 a week. And when you put that in, and they were making $20,000 a week on the game, that number is so crazy to me. And that's a small studio. So the amount of money they must have spent just on staff on making this game has to be astronomical. That's, 80 grand times 52 for just Dreadnought. Like, they have a lot less employees than Rockstar does and probably had working on Red Dead 2. So.
Right. And the thing is, too, is like Dreadnought was a cool game. Like, I played it on PlayStation 4. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed my time with Dreadnought. But again, Dreadnought, a game pretty slow paced. Like, you really have to, it's a game that I think really appeals to a certain group of players. And, it's like a multiplayer. If I remember the game correctly, it's the one that's like the multiplayer space battle one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, those ships don't move fast. It's not Call of Duty in space. It is very slow, very methodical. Like, like the game was really cool. I enjoyed it. But yeah, when you think about how much money that studio is paying their people, $80,000 a week for staff. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, all right. Anything else about Red Dead you want to talk about? I know we talked a little bit about our impressions on it. Anything that you thought about that we hadn't talked about regarding Red Dead or our time with it that you want to throw in here before we go to our topic of the show?
No, I mean, I'm still enjoying it. I do agree with you about your comments about how it's not really just a game you can jump in when you have some time to play. Like, I jumped in the other day when I had an hour to play and I didn't get too much done in that hour. So I definitely can relate to that. I just wish it's a game I enjoy a lot and I wish I had the time to dedicate to that. So we'll see where it takes me. I'll see how much time I want to put into it. I think it just means I'll end up playing other games more frequently because I have small bursts of time when the kid's taking a nap or stuff like that I can play.
Right. I was actually just having the conversation with the wife the other day about how, talking to the people in the Discord and seeing how far people are in this game. I was like, man, I used to be the person who would be one of the people who could get into a game and get through a game and be done with a game. When we first started PSVG, I was flying through stuff. And now if I have a heck of a time finding big chunks of time to play anymore, and I feel like Red Dead's one of those games where I'm going to be I'm going to play Red Dead for 8 hours. I'm just going to sit down. I'm going to have some coffee. I will stop, take a break in the middle for a quick lunch, but I'm just going to play Red Dead for 8 hours. And I just don't have those gaming times anymore. Makes it very hard to really get in and chew on, which I think is the best way to experience this game.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, with that, we'll transition to our topic of the show. And our topic of the show is actually submitted by super listener Splig, who asked us the question, basically, what are the games in the board gaming world that we have played that have changed how we view board games? And I thought this was a very elegant, eloquent, both of those things, question of, it's not super complicated. Just, hey, board games, we have hobby board games and there's more of the mainstream board games. What are those games that you played that helped change the way you view them? And we have not shared our answers, so I have no idea how many you have on your list or what games you're planning to talk about. But Josh, what is a game that you played that changed how you view board games?
So I thought I'd start from the beginning. Growing up in my house, it was what probably most generic people have experienced. We'd have game nights every once in a while. It'd be like Yahtzee or Monopoly. Um, we weren't really at the Game of Life family or Trouble. Those would be games like you'd play at like a sleepover or you're at someone's house and they have a game club, but it was never a something you would seek out. It would just kind of be something that you're bored and you're a kid. Um, there's a game I remember very specifically as a child that we would intentionally want to play, and that was called Key to the Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even tell you specifics about this game. I'm pretty sure it still exists. I just remember long board with you're moving pawns around the outside, and there was like maybe like a bridge in the middle where your goal is to get a key, and I don't think you were fighting monsters. It was typical like cards and things, but the reason why I mention it is not because I remember it vividly, because I don't, but I remember it being different from every other board game I played. And that kind of got us into like, there was a Silverhawks board game from the TV show I loved as a kid. And then there is a very large gap in my life between that and adult board gaming, where I just didn't play board games besides your Unos, and Scrabble was like not a game I wanted to play. My parents taught us Rummy Cube, which is not a kid's game by any stretch of the means. But we would play that, like, and that was pretty much it. We didn't really play like Don't Break the Ice or Kerplunk. I mean, they were around, but as for me, starting young and starting at those games, Key to the Kingdom was like, or it might even be Key in the Kingdom. It's probably Key to the Kingdom. Was one of the first games I remember being a thematic game, besides your typical board games that you're familiar with.
Awesome. No, that's great.
I was just gonna say, what about you?
No, that's great. It was interesting because when I was putting this list together, I tried to go back to the earliest time I remember playing board games that I really enjoyed playing board games. And I was someone who I had this joke because I thought I was clever when I was younger, that I didn't like playing board games because they were called board games for a reason.
Oh boy.
I thought I was a really bright kid. So I didn't play a lot of board games at all growing up. That was not something that I was into or that I really enjoyed. And surprisingly, or probably shouldn't be surprising, but a lot of the games on my list that I really thought about, games that changed how I think of them, a lot of these are really common gateway games. And I think that they have become the standard bearer gateway games for reasons. Some of them on my list aren't that, but a lot of them are. And the first one is Catan. That was the first game that I really ever played where the player interaction in the game felt meaningful and non-random. I had played other board games, but mostly, again, like games like Sorry and games like that, where sometimes bad things happen or you get hosed by other players and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. You're completely hopeless or helpless in making anything happen. Catan has a little bit of that. There's the robber and a few things that happen, but who you trade with, forming alliances, all of those player interactions things, stabbing players in the back after like saying, yeah, I'm going to help you, and making a trade with them, and then monopolying back all the cards that you just gave them. Like, there are things you can do in that game that really expanded and changed the way I thought about what it means to play games with other people. Because before, I always thought I just had to sit there and take it. Like every game I had played previously, there was really nothing you could do about a lot of the things that were happening. And Catan, because of how the player interactions work, because of how trading works, because there's multiple paths to victory, and that the board is random every time, and that, how you start and where you start matters. And there's still some luck, how if the dice rolls don't go your way a game, it's challenging to win, but you still potentially can. depending on how you interact with people, if you make good trades, if you figure out strategy for that game that is going to work based off the situation you're in, there's always something else you can do. And that for me is why Catan was really one of the first games that I played that changed the ways I looked at board games and really started me down, the hobby board game route. What's another one for you, sir?
So chronologically, the next game that changed how I view board games was Mario Party. Not a board game at all, but being an active video gamer my entire life, Mario Party, when it came out, I don't even necessarily think I played the first one. I was introduced because I was like, I'm not interested in it. It's a board game in a video game. And I was introduced to it from a friend, from a friend's girlfriend at the time, my roommate's girlfriend, who is now like my best friend, and I don't know where he is. But she would come over. She was going to college locally, and she would come over to the apartment on like nights around holidays, like when she'd be staying with family. So she would come over and she'd bring her N64, and she'd bring Mario Party, and we started playing. We'd have a couple of drinks and be social, and I'm like, I love this, and it kind of brought board gaming back to the forefront for me, and I was like, oh, maybe I want to play. And then I was like, yeah, we're going to start playing Monopoly again, and we're going to start playing all these games, and go to Toys R Us and buy like Clue and The Game of Life, and we just started playing board games again. And I thought it was like the coolest, because it became as an adult, it became a social thing all of a sudden, instead of just like a family time where you don't really want to talk to your brother or your parents about stuff. So like maybe playing Yahtzee with your parents wasn't always the coolest thing to do, but playing these board games was something where you're bonding with friends and making new friends. So Mario Party really brought me down to reintroduced me to board games in a way.
Awesome. I should ask, how many games total do you have on your list?
To be honest with you, I don't have a list on paper. It's just me going through my timeline.
Okay, no problem. I have 5, just so you know. So that is my list. So
let me do another one then. Okay. So I don't run you out.
No, okay. Go ahead.
So that way we'll be catching up. So after Mario Party was another thing, and I can show Kyle because I have it right in front of me, always near me. But Marvel, Overpower, Card Game, and Magic the Gathering were next for me, but I did not consider them board games at the time. In fact, board games were not for cool kids, but Magic was, which is totally upside down. Or that statement is wrong in all aspects. But that's what we were doing. That was our time. This was like junior high to high school. I was introduced to, I got into Marvel's Overpower because I was big into comic books. And at the time, I was big into comic book trading cards, which was a really big thing that some companies were doing. And that's all it really was. Pogs were out. So you get these trading cards. And when you get doubles, you would make Pogs out of them. But we would collect these cards, and then all of a sudden we got these Overpower cards, and we were like, oh, wait a second. You don't just collect these. This is a game. And that led into Magic the Gathering. My friends, they went out into like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. I kind of stayed in my lane. And I was like, that's for nerds too. Like when you're a nerd, you're uppity about other nerds. So you call nerds that are you call them nerds, but you're cool. Which is super hypocritical, and the start of terrible nerd culture. But that was big. But at the time, it changed how I view board games, but it didn't necessarily shape me into a board game player. It kind of separated me away from board games again, and I thought that this is what I'm doing. Card games are much cooler. I can keep buying these and collecting these, and I'm building my own, essentially making my own board game if it was a card game. So that was next chronologically for me. What do you have next on your list?
So next on my list is not my list is not chronological. So
It's okay. It's okay.
I feel bad if I take anything that you are going to talk about. I feel a little bad about it if it happens.
No, we literally discussed none of this together.
That's true. No, absolutely.
You shouldn't feel bad.
So next on my list then is Pandemic. And the reason Pandemic is on my list is prior to playing Pandemic, I had never played a cooperative board game before. I didn't even know they existed. And when I played this game for the first time, I realized a new way that I could play board games in some ways similar to playing couch co-op video games, that it didn't always have to be about beating each other, that we could play things together and have a lot of fun. And because of that, I really enjoyed and kind of fell in love with the cooperative board game genre. As a whole, I think I probably prefer cooperative games to versus games, if you would, or games that have potentially, like, I enjoy a good hidden trader mechanic. But I really enjoy the idea of us working together, because when you bring folks over for a board game night or a board game day, one of the worst things that can happen is if you have people who are really bad losers or really bad winners. And that really, really can make it an unfun time and really uncomfortable. And then you have to have conversations with people you don't want to. And sometimes there are people who are just like, look, we're not going to invite so-and-so because they're just not fun to play with. But if you play a co-op game, that possibility, a lot of that goes away. So that's the reason that I think Pandemic really changed the way I look at board games, because to me, it was this opportunity or this option to still be able to play games and not always have them be so competitive, not have them be such about hurt feelings all the time. Granted, specifically with Pandemic, you do get that alpha gamer problem. Yeah. But if you're playing with a good group, hopefully, or even a group sometimes that's really competitive, this is a really nice way to be able to kind of smooth things over after a really rough game, or a game that was very close or very competitive, or where people were, really kind of grinding at one another. I think, playing a co-op is great. And Pandemic was the game that showed me what co-ops can do. What is next for you, sir?
So next for me is the game that officially got me to where I am now, which has got me back into board games in a big way. And you've already touched on it. It was Settlers of Catan. I was very late to this game. In fact, I was familiar with it and I had no interest in playing it because that's what nerds played. And I was very much that kind of guy for a long time. Like, I'd go to PAX East and I'd be like, I don't go to the board game area. That's where the nerds go. Like, I was I was a jerk about things like that. Because I felt like I needed to feel better about my guilty pleasure hobby. And I obviously know that was a mistake to do. I've learned from that, but a friend came over. I started working with a guy at Best Buy who played board games, and he convinced me to hang out and play Catan, and said, all right, we were drinking, and that was like my gateway to that was having a couple beers. And we played Catan, and I absolutely fell in love with the game, and I was so mad at myself for waiting so long to play it. And then I was like, well, I need to get this game tomorrow. And okay, I wasn't necessarily on the expansion wagon yet because we only played at base, but I was like, I gotta get the 5 to 6 player expansion, and then eventually I got the board where you put the slots in, and I'd play it all the time, and I'd introduce friends and family to it, and it was really just something new to me. And for the time I played it, getting a victory was very important to me, so I was kind of extra celebratory when I would win, but I wasn't winning all the time, so I didn't feel like extra douchey about it. I've learned to taper down my excitement because I do know that can frustrate people. So I try to just be happy for the experience. And now I'm happy losing games as long as it's a good experience. Like, I can play a game and not be mad that I lose. But yeah, it just really got me into buying, collecting, and playing as many board games as I could. So that was
Awesome.
the big step for me.
Very cool. And I do think it's interesting because, Catan as a game, I think most gamers have some fond memories of the game, even if they don't
Yeah,
really play it much today. I think most gamers who are really into hobby board gaming still have very fond memories of that game, at least at some point in their
yeah.
playing career. The next game on my list is a game that introduced me and kind of, in a lot of ways, defined and created this genre, which is now basically my favorite genre of games, and that's Dominion. I am a huge fan of deck builders. Deck building games are probably my favorite games overall. A lot of that comes from my time with Magic. And actually, Magic's not on my list, oddly enough. But Dominion was the game that really was the first board game I played without a board. It was the first time I'd really gotten into or had learned that this style of game existed, and it was something that I immediately gravitated to. And it taught me that, a lot about how, engine building and understanding how engines work, and trying to create a deck and getting rid of cards can be a good thing. That is, you don't always want to fill your deck with cards, and all of those things that now you take for granted, and strategies that you can use when you're playing just about any deck building or game that has a deck in it. Dominion taught me almost all of those things. So really changed not only the way I look at board games and that this genre existed that I didn't know was there, and that you could play board games without a board, but also changed the way that I look even today at other games and games that have decks in them, or there's any part of building a deck, if that exists at all. A lot of the things that I learned in playing Dominion, I apply to those games today, of trying to build an engine, trying to remove cards from your deck, trying to draw cards as often as you can, and really trying to implement a lot of the lessons I learned there into the games I still play today. So that was the next one on my list, Dominion. What's next for you, sir?
It's funny how that worked out, because my next game is my second or third year at PAX. When I got into the board game stuff, my friend Marcel and I were with a friend in a hotel. We all decided to go out together, and the first night we got there, we pulled a table into the middle of the two beds, and my buddy's like, "I got this game. It's by a guy who made Magic. It's called Ascension, and I'm going to teach you guys how to play." And I said, "All right, cool. I'm up for learning a new game." And he opened it up. He taught us how to play. I won my first game. I fell in love, and I was like, "This is my card game meets my board game love." And it's my first deck builder, and it certainly isn't my last deck builder, because I fell in love with the deck builder genre. He jokes about it all the time. He says, "I taught you how to play Ascension, and then as soon as we got back from PAX, you bought it and every expansion and every card available for the game." And I'm like, "Yeah, I absolutely fell in love with that game." And we got to meet Justin Gary at that PAX. My buddy was too shy to go say hi to him, so I just went up and said hi to him. And I would have a totally different conversation with him now than I did back then, because he was just a guy working the Stoneblade booth at the time. And they might not have even been Stoneblade at the time. They might have had a different name. Or they might have just become Stoneblade. But it was just this game where I'm like, I build up. It's a drafting game. I build up this deck that's competitive against other people, and you have recruit points and attack points, and there's monsters, and it's all in this easier to approach and play than Magic kind of thing. And I don't have to worry about specifically buying decks all the time. I can just have this self-contained game. And I got home, I got all the expansions. I put them all together, which you should never do. So I had my Ascension game was over 1,000 cards, and you would never see the same card twice, which isn't good for Ascension, because you need to rely on cards working together.
Right.
So I don't recommend doing what I did. Keep them separate and occasionally combine a couple games together. But yeah, it really changed my my world of board games when I got Ascension, and now there's just been so many incredible deck builders. And I got into Dominion late, so I really enjoyed Dominion too. But it could have just as easily been Dominion that changed me, but it just happened to be Ascension.
Right. Back then, were they still Gary Games back then?
Yeah, they were Gary games. That's what
Okay.
it was.
Yeah. So awesome. Second to last game on my list is actually, I don't think this one we're going to have in common at all, because I think this is going to be a not typical place for this game for most people. But that game is Trajan or Trajan, depending on who you talk to, a Steffenfeld game. And for me, this was the first heavy Euro that I played that I enjoyed. I had never really liked heavy Euros before. I had played them prior to this game, and this game's probably 7 years old or so at this point. Like I said, I had played some. I had just never really enjoyed them that much before. But this was the game. I don't know if it was the Mancala mechanism or what exactly it was about it, but this was the first time I really enjoyed playing a heavier Euro style game that, there is some card drafting in it. There is some hand management in it. But it is a lot of trying to manipulate this Mancala and figure out what actions you're going to take based off of how you move these pieces around and the strategy that goes along with that. So it's not a ton of a worker placement game. There's definitely that in it. It's just much more area movement, set collection, and trying to figure out this Mancala system and moving the pieces appropriately to get the actions that you want. So to me, that was really kind of softened the heavy Euro for me. It's still not a genre that I am going to play a ton. I like a really, really, really heavy Euro. Like I love Caverna. Like I like the really heavy, crunchy ones that are that take a lot of time, that take, have a ton of pieces that are really fiddly. Like I really like the super heavy ones, but these ones that are, kind of fit in this middle-ish area that are not an entry-level game, but are not going to be, the pinnacle heaviest you've ever seen. I hadn't played a ton of these that I liked, really none up to this point, but Trajan is the game that changed that for me and really let me enjoy and has helped me enjoy that middle to slightly heavier Euro in a way I didn't think that I ever could. So again, still not my favorite category of games, but it definitely was the one that said, hey, these games can be okay sometimes. Make sure you give them a chance. So it changed the way I looked at that weight of a game. What else for you, sir?
So the next one is a game that, so I found myself in this silo almost from my family, right? So everyone's like, what are all these board games you're into? And, I just had my select group of friends, and family is a big part of my life and is very important to me. So they're people I spend a lot of time around. So when Ticket to Ride entered entered my collection, it was a game I found very easy to teach my family, and in fact, they were hesitant. My brother started dating his now wife. Her folks had a beach house at Old Orchard Beach in Maine, and once they were in their relationship long enough, they invited all of us up, and I was dating my wife at the time. And, we all went up, and I'm like trying to think of like bring a game to play. And I'm thinking they're going to want to play Uno and they're going to want to play Yahtzee. And I'm like, I'm going to bring Ticket to Ride. Ash, my wife, likes it a lot. And my girlfriend at the time. And my folks were resistant. They didn't want to, like, they were getting frustrated. They didn't know what was happening. But, 4 turns in, they got it. And then they started asking for it whenever we would go places. So Ticket to Ride specifically, but pretty much any game like that, like Sagrada, Azul, games like these, that have been able to turn casual non-board gamers into board gamers. Ticket to Ride was really big for me in my ability to play more games and to introduce people to more board games. So that would be my second to last milestone.
Awesome. My last one is a game I've talked about on this podcast a ton. So I'm not going to talk about it very long, but I think it really did help me understand and really help me appreciate how much theme matters in a game. And it is a much more recent game than every other game on my list, and that is Dead of Winter. Because up until then, I had played games that had theme, and I thought, oh, this is kind of cool, whatever. But I never really fallen in love with a game with a good theme until Dead of Winter. And I think it's interesting because if you go look at the thematic category of games on Board Game Geek, and you look at games ranked by in the thematic category, there's maybe, I think Dead of Winter is like number 25 or number 26. There's like 3 or 4 games, I think, above it that came out prior to it. And a lot of games that came out the year it came out and after. So I think theme is something that, and I'm not saying that Dead of Winter is the game that made that happen. I just think that it came out at the time when there was a shift in the industry, I feel like, where theme really became a very big deal, that people paid much more attention to it, that the idea of a pasted on theme wasn't, that became like a negative term, that this is just a pasted on theme. So for me, Dead of Winter was the first game where I was like, I felt like even if I didn't know the rules, if I looked at the theme of the game and said, okay, what am I supposed to do in this situation? Or how is this supposed to work? Do what seems right with the theme, and almost always that's the right decision in the rules. So I felt like it just fit that really well. And on top of that, it was the first game that I played extensively that had the hidden trader, or the potential for a hidden trader. And I love hidden traders. They're so fun. I love them so much. So in Dead of Winter really just checks all the boxes for me, and has a dog in it, right? I spent $90 on a video game because of a dog. You know, it has a dog in it. So really, Dead of Winter has a dog, has a trader, really good, oozes theme well. That game really is the standard bearer for me. When I compare games and I look at thematic games, I look at it and I compare everything to Dead of Winter and how well I feel the theme is implemented in that game, because I think it is top notch. What is the last one on your list, sir?
So the last one is legacy games, in the vein of Pandemic and Pathfinder Adventure card game, but specifically it's Risk Legacy. Risk Legacy is a game that I only really was interested in because of like word of mouth about it. Like, I wasn't a big Risk fan. It just kind of was like, Risk was kind of one of those other games like old people play, like my dad played when he was a kid or something like that. But we had a game group, a study game group at the time, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to buy this game. No one expects me to buy it. It was expensive. It was $60 when it came out, and that was a lot for a board game at the time.
At the time.
And nobody knew in our group anything about it. All we knew was it said on the box, you destroy cards in this game. And everyone was like, wow, at least if it's a gimmick, it's a cool one. And what legacy games do is they bring people together consistently. It becomes a family because you're playing the same game with the same people on a potentially regular basis, depending. And for us with Risk Legacy, it was a sometimes twice a week, at least once a week adventure, to the point where we played it again. We got another box and we started playing another Risk Legacy, but it was something where people would get mad at each other. You're still competitive. People would work together. There would be weeks where people were tired and they were angry, or they were grouchy, or they were happy. We went through a relationship together. And it was unlike anything I had ever done, and it was incredible. And it made me appreciate Risk more, and it made me see a whole new side of what board games could be. It wasn't just a board game, and it was so new. You couldn't even really talk to people about it because it was hard to explain what you're doing. What do you mean? You pay $60 and you rip up cards? Why would you do that? You
Right.
write on the board. What if you want to play it again? No, you don't play it again. What do you mean you don't play it again? So it was an adventure, and it was Risk Legacy is a game that it will be hard for me to ever forget my experience with that game. It might be the most defining game I played as a board gamer. Um, but I wouldn't say it's the game that shaped me the most as a board gamer.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Splig, that was an excellent topic. I think Josh and I had a wonderful time with that. We didn't ask for emails or questions or anything like that for this episode since we were doing it so early. But as always, if you do have questions or topics you want us to cover, hit us up at Board with VG on Twitter, or send us an email, boardwithvg@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to talk about the topics that you want to hear about, because that's what we're here to do. Well, what I thought would be a short episode has turned out to be a normal length episode. But we can't leave you without giving you some recommendations for a well-rounded life. While we are clearly a gaming podcast, we want to give you a recommendation, a suggestion, a thing that we are into lately that is helping us live that well-rounded life. So the only thing we're not doing is games. Josh, what would you like to recommend to people this week for a well-rounded life?
Okay, so the things we've said have been blending themselves together. So I'm not sure if it's something I have said before or not.
Okay.
But here's what I would say. Take a day, one day, a month. Set aside 2 hours, maybe on a weekend, whenever you have free time, and literally just go take a walk by yourself. No podcasts, no iPhones, no switches. Pick a destination. Maybe you want to go get lunch. Maybe you just want to take a walk around the track. Maybe you want to go to a friend's house. But pick a destination that you know is somewhere you can get to and get home from. So for me, it would be like I want to take a walk to the pub and get a sandwich and a beer for lunch. And just do it. Go do it. Take in the sights. Think to yourself. Have that time. And if you want to get to wherever you're going and sit down and use your phone or whatever you want to do that. But taking a break from everything, I think you will find is remarkably different than if you're not already doing it. It might not be great. You might not like it. You might hate it. But it's going to be different regardless. It will be a change of pace. And if it's something that you do enjoy, keep doing it once a week. It's not much, 2 hours. We put so much importance to every minute of our day, and we're always doing something that we don't, and this sounds cliche, and people probably say it all the time, but it's something I never did and until fairly recently, and it's something that I find very important and something I enjoy. So that's what I would say. Give yourself some time.
That is an awesome recommendation. I think this isn't quite like, doesn't fit exactly what you're talking about, but I think really was what I started thinking about when you were talking about it is I spend so much of my time, like I don't have a long commute to work, but typically when I am in the car, I am often the person driving, right? When I ride in the passenger seat of a vehicle, like if I'm going to the store with my wife and she's driving because we're in her vehicle, the amount of things that I notice that I had no idea were there, that I have driven past a ton of times, but I've been driving, so I haven't been paying attention to extraneous things, is mind-blowing. The things that exist in my neighborhood, in my area, that I had no idea were there, is really quite astonishing, and in a lot of ways really sad that I never noticed them before.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I love your recommendation of going out for a walk and just taking in everything. That is awesome. My recommendation, one thing that I don't think I've really talked about much on this podcast at all, is I think we all know that I like movies. Like we talk about movies, it seems like every podcast at some point. But one thing people may not know is that my probably favorite, or if not favorite, close to favorite genre of movies is actually documentaries. I love watching documentaries. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm always constantly seeking out documentaries. And I was going to recommend a different one than the one I am, but I found out that the one I was going to recommend is no longer on Netflix streaming, so it's much more difficult to watch. So I'm not going to recommend that one, but maybe someday I'll talk about it differently. But Josh, do you remember a few years ago, there were some controversies and some suspensions for the the country of Russia in the Olympics because of doping. Do you remember this?
I do, and I know exactly what you're going to talk about, and it is on my must-see list. I haven't watched yet.
Yes. So there is a documentary, and then I won't talk too much about it, but there is a documentary on Netflix called Icarus. And the movie starts out and I was interested in the movie initially because back in a different life, I thought I wanted to be a cyclist. I was like training hard. I was riding, 5 hours a day, Monday through Friday. I was doing long, 9, 10, 12-hour rides on weekends. Like I really thought I was going to be a cyclist. But the way this movie starts is the Brian Fogel, the person who's the director and the person you see in the movie most of the time, is a cyclist. And he wants to know, this is when all the Lance Armstrong stuff was coming out. He wants to figure out, could he dope like Lance Armstrong and beat all of the tests? So he's trying to figure out someone who can help him dope. And through a lot of connections with other people in the United States, he ends up getting put in contact with a doctor in Russia who happens to oversee their anti-doping agency there. And boy, howdy, does this documentary take a left turn at some point, and you start learning a whole lot of things that you had no idea about. So the initial premise, very interesting, right? Can this amateur cyclist who is trying to compete in one of the most challenging amateur road cycling competitions in the world, he wants to improve his placement in it, but they do doping tests. So he wants to see if he can improve his placement and beat the doping test. So he's like, yep, I want to do this. I want to be Lance Armstrong of amateurs. Who can help me? Finds a person to help him. Interesting premise to start with, but man, does this thing take a right turn partway through, and it is a fascinating documentary. I can't recommend it enough. That is Icarus, and it is on Netflix.
Awesome.
All right, sounds like it is going to be it for this week for us. Josh, what do you say we wrap this up?
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Remember, find us on social media at BoredWithVG and use that hashtag BoredWithVG. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/BoredWithVG. And hopefully by the time you hear this, a very full inbox at boredwithvg@gmail.com. You can find me on Xbox Live and PlayStation Network as Why So Serious. That's SIRRIUS. If you're going to send me a message, make sure you say, just put Bored with VG in there so I know you're not one of these age, sex, location bots that are trying to hit me up. And you can find me on Instagram at Josh Bones, but might as well just stick to ours because I don't really post anything but pictures of my kid. So those are my plugs. Kyle, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me at all the usual places: Twitter, Instagram, PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, Board Game Geek, all at Cycocross, CYCOCROSS. If you have suggestions for future topics, be sure to reach out to us on the social media because we want to talk about what you want to hear about. And remember, everyone, whether it be board games or video games, never stop gaming.